Yeah, we start. It's 10, and the room is not totally filled yet, but hopefully it will fill up a bit more later this morning. Thank you and welcome, all of you. Thank you for coming to Athens. We are so delighted that you all came here. You kept us in tense expectation for some time. The registrations came in quite late this time, so we were really thrilled to see that in the end there were about 500 people who came here, or were already here, but at least 400 came from other countries to join their Greek colleagues in these 3 days of brainstorming that we have in front of us. I start to do this nice job of saying thank you to our benefactors. We needed a lot of benefactors this time because it is a meeting that's based on a zero budget. And the 1,300 euros that you brought in by the crowdfunding campaign. Thank you for that. Another way you can support this meeting is by go and see the shows. Buy the tickets, because the main part of the organizing team of IETM Athens was not only organizing this meeting, but at the same time preparing their shows that they like to show to you during those 3 days. Yes, and we are here in Technopolis, which is given to us for free by the municipality of Athens. We are very grateful for that. The Ministry of Culture has promised some money. It hasn't come in yet. In the meantime, there was a change of ministers, so it took some time, and hopefully there will be a moment that indeed we will see that the money comes in. Till now, Kelly has done it with your 1,300 euros. Thanks for that. And apart from these 2 governmental structures, we have to say thank you to the British Council in Greece that brought in some people from the UK as a speaker or a moderator. Institut Français Belgrade, in Theatroscope context, brought in some people from the Balkan area. The Australian Council of the Arts, for the Arts, as usual, brought in some people from Australia. And we really took advantage of their invitations in order to fill in our list of moderators and speakers. But most of all, of course, we have to say thank you to the Athens core team of organizers, and they were surrounded by tens, hundreds of others, apart from the 100 volunteers that you will see pop up in their blue t-shirts. There have been many other people attached to the few people that I would like to come here. I hope they're in the room, I'm not quite sure. But otherwise we will have another moment to say thank you to them at the end of our meeting in the closing ceremony. But Philippos, are you here? Come here. Vicky is not here. Gabriella? Yeah. Aristoteles is not here. Frosso? Come on. Kassiani? No, it's not here. Yorgos is not here. No, they're all so busy. But at least these together, and under the inspiring leadership of Kelly Diapoli, has made this possible. An applause for them, please. Okay, thank you. You may go back to your place. And then there was a team in Brussels that was a bit reduced this time, but thank God we had 3 wonderful interns. They just can stand up. Elliot, Granny Soke, Erica Bernardi. She's not in the room. Bye, Svenjatje. She's not in the room either. Well, you will probably see them somewhere around the registration desk where, I don't know, Letitia, she's not here. Milica, is she in the room? No, this was the moment I wanted to announce that it will be a Milica Ilic's last meeting after 10 years, enormous dedication to IETM. And what we prepared for her is a small booklet, and that's at the registration desk. And if any of you is willing to leave her a note, a goodbye, because it will be her last meeting, please come and write a little text for her instead of sending your emails or your Twitters. It's nice if she has something really old school written in a small golden book. It will be in the hands of Letitia at the registration desk. Please come by and leave your short, nice message to Milica, and we will hand it over to her at the end of the meeting. Okay, here we are in Athens, and I think it's the best place to be at this moment for us as a network to rethink our values, to reformulate our goals, and to reconsider all our structures. And if Greece is not your home, let it be at least your mirror or your wake-up call. The people that organized this meeting gave it the title Tomorrow, and that tells a lot, because they are the people that were born in the 80s, yet another crisis, 30 years ago, that had as its slogan, "No future." And it's very obvious that we see now a generation living in another crisis that is not giving it the title "No future," but tomorrow. They really realize that this tomorrow is something that they have to create themselves. It's in their hands to make a future. And I hope that the brain power that's around here will help them to create that tomorrow. My strongest impression when I arrived here for my first time on the mainland of Greece last July, in preparation of this meeting, was that Greece still is a land of poets. The poet is really valued over here. People are reading, and it's even told to me that to enter the Department of Literature and Language in the university in Greece, till recently you needed higher rates, school rates, than to enter the Department of Economy and Law, which tells something, maybe also about a crisis, but at least about the value they give to the arts. And I think it's good to end my short contribution reading a poem, and it's a poem of the Irish poets that passed away quite recently, Seamus Heaney, and I hope I pronounce his name well. Willie, do I? Seamus Heaney. Seamus Heaney. Thank God we have some Irish native speakers. And now it's hard for me to read a poem in English, but I'll do my best. The form of the poem is crucial to a poetry's power to do the thing which always is and always will be to poetry's credit. The power to persuade that the vulnerable part of our consciousness... Oh, sorry. Indeed, it's hard. The form of the poet is crucial to poetry's powers to do the thing which always is and always will be to poetry's credit. The power to persuade that the vulnerable part of our consciousness of its rights, to persuade that vulnerable part of our consciousness of its rightness, in spite of the evidence of wrongness all around it. The power to remind us that we are hunters and gatherers of values. And that's what I recommend to all of us. Let us not talk too much crisis, but let us talk about the transition. Let's not talk too much money, but let us talk about our aims. Let us turn into those poets, hunters and gatherers of the values, and find out how to create a tomorrow. I'm looking forward to see you again at the Talks and Listens, the closing session, both on Saturday afternoon and on Sunday morning when we present the next meetings of Montpellier and Melbourne. Okay, and I hand the mic over to Kelly Diapoli.
Well, thank you, Nan. And I want to welcome you all from my side on behalf of the Greek organizing team, which is big, here to Athens. And this is the first meeting, the IETM meeting ever taking place in Greece, and we are kind of thrilled about it. Whereas the discussions about having an IETM meeting date back to 2005, when the Greek sector looked very different than what it looks now, and nobody could even imagine what was ahead of us. So I would like to thank in chronological order all the people that contributed to making this meeting, not all the people, because I'm afraid I'm going to forget many of them. So I would like to thank Rena Kostandaki from Indigo Fair Art Productions, who in Copenhagen IETM meeting brought again the idea of organizing a meeting, an IETM meeting in Athens. She was sitting in the Talks and Listens in the same table with some board members. I remember Judith Knight, Virve Soutine, who embraced the idea, and Mary Ann de Vlieg, who was there, embraced the idea from the very beginning and supported us very much. Then Michel Queret, who from the very beginning was next to us. He came here last December to help us and get to know better the Greek performing arts sector. And then Nan van Hoyte, who has been our guardian angel for the past months and has spent endless hours for the program. The communication guru, Mili Chailits, the registration guru, Leticia Van de Valle, and of course the interns, Cinta Wibovo, Eliart, Erika Bernardi, and Baiba. I'm supposed to give you a better idea of the contemporary Greek sector. As I have noted in the introduction to the program, our idea about this meeting was that tomorrow is a work in progress. And as such, what we can do is work for it. But in order to work and get a result, we need to know where we stand today and what has happened yesterday. So I will very briefly go through and try to describe you how the independent sector was developed in Greece in the last decades. Today, the independent sector counts more than 400 companies, which for Greece is a lot. They cover about 90% of the total production. There are only two public structures: the National Theatre and the National Theatre of Northern Greece, and even these organizations and the public organizations such as the Athens Festival or private foundations such as the Onassis Cultural Center, they depend on the independent sector to create their program. At the same time, this sector is the one that is mostly hit by the crisis and the cuts of public funding. The companies haven't received any funding in the last 2 years. So it is more than urgent if we want to sustain the Greek production, to sustain the independent sector, and that's why we have focused the IETM Athens meeting in the problems that the independent sector is facing today. In order to better understand how the sector is functioning, we need to take a closer look on how it was developed during the last decade. The sector as we know it today looked very different some years ago. In the beginning of the 80s, the independent sector was made of no more than 10 to 20 companies. At that time, the then Ministry of Culture, Melina Mercouri, who was an actress herself and sensitive and knowledgeable about the problems that the sector faces, initiated the subsidy system for the independent theatres companies. This allowed the then existing companies to be able to sustain themselves as they were receiving on an annual basis a subsidy from the Ministry of Culture. At the same time, in the end of the 80s, a private television came into being in Greece. So private channels used to produce a number of TV serials providing jobs to actors and performers. As a result, the companies, the performing arts companies, focused their work in Athens because the actors could be employed both in theater and in TV shows. But this had a very negative side effect, the fact that the companies detached themselves from the periphery and from audiences outside Athens. The decades of the 80s and the 90s have been decades of prosperity for the Greek society. And especially in the last decade, the independent sector has grown bigger, both in terms of quantity and quality. This is to a great extent the result of the prosperity of the 80s and the 90s, and the fact that the Greek families could invest, and they did invest it during these years, to the education of their children. As Nant said, yes, in Greece, education is something very important. It's something that the families invest on, but and this allowed for many contemporary actors to go abroad, study, get to know recent trends. We realized it was not our initial aim, but we realized after the formation of the program that most of the artists we have selected have studied abroad, either in Britain or in Germany or in France. This was not intention, but it is indicative of how this generation was formatted and of the characteristics of this generation. So, as a result, in the beginning of the new millennium, a new generation of indies appeared in Greece, and the proliferation of this generation changed completely the look of the Greek sector on the whole. The first signs of change appeared in 2002 with the creation of Bios Art Center. Bios Art Center was the first art center operating not in commercial terms, but in artistic terms, meaning having an artistic director, having a program, and supporting in the way they can, not by subsidizing, but by providing the space and administrative support to all, not to all, to the companies they believed in order to produce. So in the next year, Bios developed into a hub for contemporary companies who were doing research and are willing to take risk. The second important development was the appointment of Yorgos Loukos as an artistic director of the Athens Festival in 2006. Since then, the Athens Festival, who used to be something very elite, opened its doors to this new generation, gave them commissions to produce new shows, and brought them in touch with the contemporary developments in other parts of Europe. And then the crisis came, and all available funding for the ministry disappeared. The budget of the Athens Festival was dramatically cut, and the independent sector was already very big to be sustained either only by the Ministry of Culture or by the Athens Festival. On the top of that, due to the centralization of production in Athens, no work has been done so far towards the direction of developing the audiences outside of Athens. The local authorities, municipalities, prefecture are not at all involved in the process of cultivating contemporary culture. Although they run some festivals and some local art centers, these art centers have no artistic director. They don't they don't know contemporary production. And at the same time, the artists are confronted with a reality where they are very well trained, they are eager to work and to create, and on the other hand, they don't have the means to do it. So, how do you create when you don't have the means? You create with nothing. This is what we did also with IETM meeting. You finance yourself, which most of the times means that you work in other jobs in order to be able to do your production or do a project that you want to do. But what I want to say is that we definitely don't propose that as a model of production. Many people yesterday praised us on having organized this meeting with literally nothing. And I really want to thank you very much all for your understanding and for the fact that you are here. But I want to stress out once more that this is not a model we propose. We did it because we thought it's really important at this time to get together here and try to work all together in order to find solutions for a sustainable future. So, the Greek sector, finds itself today in a very crucial momentum when the future appears ambiguous. The question of sustainability is core, and if we manage to find solutions to sustain the artists and cultural operators in their job, the sector will survive. If not, the artists will inevitably turn to other jobs, which means that the sector will disappear or, in the best case, diminish greatly. A question that it is raised many times is, why is it important for arts and artists to survive? And yeah, I mean, it's very common nowadays to say that, okay, we have art all around, why do we need to pay that artist to do what they have in mind? And I would like to borrow a phrase of Bernard Fevre-Darcier, who he's a person that has inspired me much. When he was asked about the role of the director, of a festival director, he has said that the festival director is the donkey who carries the prophet. And I think this characterization could be extended to all the cultural managers. We are the donkeys that carry the prophets. But I also think that in the same way that cultural managers are the donkeys who carry the prophet, artists are also the donkeys who carry the society on the whole on their backs. Artists are the safeguards and trustees of the moral and ethical values on which we build our communities. They work in the area of cultivating the experience, the feeling, the emotional intelligence, and in this way, they become safeguards of our humanity and of our sensitivity. And especially today, when phenomena of racism and fascism rise again, it is more than urgent to recognize the importance of the artist's work. And I want to say something else as well. Culture is not an abstract concept. Culture has flesh and body, and its flesh and body is the bodies of the people who work for it, of the artists, of the cultural operators. So if the states and the private sector are interested to sustain the arts, they need to examine very closely and get involved in the process of sustaining the artists and the cultural operators. In the IETM Athens, we have focused our work on this generation of artists that work without getting paid. Actually, they finance their work. Many times, they finance their work. And we would like to invite you all to do the same in this IETM meeting. Work with us during these days to create, to find out some solutions for that could be a basis for a different tomorrow. And I will end here and pass the word to an artist, Alexandros Mistriotis, of this generation, to give us his perspectives on tomorrow. And thank you very much again for being here. It's really important for us. And enjoy yourselves as well.
Hello. Χαίρετε. Luckily enough, I'm not supposed to introduce myself. I was invited to welcome you in Athens, which is an honor, but it's also an awkward position. The question arises, from which position do I speak to you? Who am I? And by the way, who are you? That's your problem. And I think that my position is plainly two-folded. I'm an artist, and I am a citizen of this city, which means that I'm also a citizen of this language and of this Greek state.
Can you all hear?
So we're all gathered here in Athens. Athens is an invisible city. The reason why is because everybody thinks that they know what it's all about. Athens has occupied a symbolic field that it's supposed to be in the foundation of our contemporary world. And this is quite problematic, actually, because people are unable to see, to look, to listen to what is really happening. And not just now. It's been like this for more than 200 years. I will tell you a personal story. When I was living abroad, quite often people would realize that I was a stranger because of my accent. And they would ask me, "Where do you come from?" And most of the time, I would play with them the game, "Guess where do I come from?" Most of the time, they wouldn't even talk about Greece, even though I would try to guide them. I would tell them, "I come from a European country, I'm from the south, it's in the Mediterranean." They would mention Portugal, which is not in the Mediterranean. They would mention Turkey, they would mention Israel. Greece, most of the time, wasn't there. And it's not by accident. There's a reason for that. And there's a reason that is related to our impasse and that crisis, not the local, the Greek crisis, but the European one. But we'll try to start with something a little bit more precise, more localized, with Athens, Greece, and this state that we call Greek democracy. So there's been a glorification, an apotheosis of the classical Greek 7th century before Christ. When the Greek state was created, the excavations in the Acropolis threw away all the other archaeological strata, and they kept only the 5th century. All the rest was of no importance. Luckily enough, there were some wells where we found elements that could help us learn a little bit what happened to the Acropolis. But the Acropolis was supposed to be, because the identification was so strong, the place for the palace of the Bavarian king when he came. There's another thing which is really important, is to think that the first journal of the state of Greece was in German and in Greek, because we had a Bavarian prince as a king. And then in the parliament, we had 3 parties that were named officially the Friends of France, get in, the Friends of France, the Friends of England, and the Friends of Russia. Well, there were no Friends of Germany because they had the government. And there's another story that I find even more revealing. You've probably heard about Lord Elgin when he took the marbles from the Parthenon. Well, actually, one of the first things that he did when he took them home was to wash them well. Why? Because they were not white enough, because there were still paintings on them. And they were supposed to be white, because this was the idea that they had. Actually, in a peculiar way, I think that I, as a Greek, and the people that you will see in the streets, and you will try to understand what they're talking about, they're parts of the same body that has been washed and washed and washed, and it has been unable to fit in the ideas that others had about them. And they're condemned to fail again and again. Why is that important? Because this apotheosis has replaced the most important contribution of the Greek experiment. I'm talking about the ancient Greek experiment. Why that? Because we cannot understand anymore the fact that the most important thing was the failure. It was not about creating a knowledge that we can put into our pocket and into our universities. It was about a devastating experience that led almost to nothing. And I will come back to that. But it is really important because it is a tool of self-understanding. And it has been used in a really catastrophic way during the centuries. Even the colonialism was based on the fact that the European world was superior, and it was superior because it had something. And this something was this objectified knowledge that was related to the ancient world, not just the Greek one. But the Greek one was necessary as a founding moment. So right now, we should realize that instead of talking about a knowledge that we can keep in a pocket, put in a box, or in a certificate, actually we're just, as everybody, hunted by questions. And we're desolated, and we're marching through a desert. And this is the best thing that can happen to us. So, let's go a little bit deeper. We could say that democracy, tragedy, and philosophy are related to the Athenian and the Greek experiment. It is important to put all three of them together, especially in that meeting, because if we take one of these three, the other two are losing their depth. If you take tragedy out of democracy, you don't realize the depth and the danger of the questions that existed at the time. If you take tragedy without philosophy, then you don't understand why this all happened. It just becomes a commodity, as it is most of the time in our days. I'm talking about theater and art. And if you take the political situation, the questions about democracy out of philosophy, then, and you don't realize that it responds to things that happened at the time, then it becomes just an academic toy. I'm talking about philosophy now. So, the most important thing, and I guess tragedy is the more subtle element in this puzzle, is the fact that tragedy is talking about our fragility. And fragility is something that we need to reconsider, because it's our last hope against the temptation of totalitarian society. So, what happened at the time was that we started having a definition of man that was so complicated, that released so much energy, that this system, the society, and the definition of man became more and more unstable. So, the Greek world, at the end, was blown into pieces. And this was the most important accomplishment. It was the realization that man cannot fit in space and time. Man cannot fit in any description. Man cannot fit in any kind of system. And I would try to give you an example and talk about the end, actually, of the classical world. Most of the time we're talking about the Peloponnesian War. But I'd suggest an equally devastating moment, which is the Bacchantes of Euripides. So it is supposed to be the last tragedy of the last tragic poet. Well, that can be disputed, but it is true that it was one of the last. What happens in this tragedy, I will try to resume really fast, is that we have the young king of Thebes, which is Pentheus, which denies a new cult that is coming from the east, the cult of Dionysus. And he considers this as a fraud, as a superstition. When Dionysus comes, he tries to talk with him and see, and finally he doesn't manage to convince him. He doesn't try much though, and he's jailed. The god, which is, he presents himself as a man, and then we have the turning point of the play where the god gets out. He humiliates the king of the city. He takes them out in the woods, and he's dismembered, cut into pieces by the followers of Dionysus, and decapitated by his mother, that brings his head, without being unable to realize that she has killed her son, by thinking that it is the head of a lion. So the end is really brutal and ruthless. we could probably say that the God won, but actually, that's not true. What happened is that God and man in that play are completely devastated. The way that God is winning is so absolute, so ruthless, that finally we can see the doubts of this poet that was labeled as an atheist at the time, to show that there's a complete impasse. There's nothing left. And just to assure you that this is not my way to see things, the tradition says that Euripides died torn into pieces by two hungry dogs, and they were sent by Dionysus. So the people at the time, they really knew what this was all about. So what happens is that finally what we have is just this desire to find justice, to find beauty, to find truth. And we're left with this knowledge that we will always be under the shadow of this monk, of this thirst, of this need. So, shyly enough, I've been already talking about the future. I'm already talking about tomorrow. I'm already talking about the temptations that we have and the things that actually we shouldn't do, we shouldn't embrace. And what is the most important element in our adventure coming? And Athens is an extremely fertile terrain for this endeavor. Well, actually, it is scary because it is not something that was chosen. It is something that is falling on the land. But it is localized, and the symbolic importance of this city now is huge. I've lived most of my life next to the Acropolis, and I really hated it. Now, I go out, I look at it, and I think that it has a meaning, a new meaning. We have a reason to refer to the Acropolis now, because we know that the failure of our symbolic system and the reference that we have in modern democracies is really problematic. So, Athens is a battlefield, and it's a battlefield where people die every day, physically and psychologically. But we should not forget that a battlefield is also a meeting point. And it's up to us to change the dynamic. There is a test, and I wish that we will all have clarity of mind in order to see, strength in order to endure, and aptitude to embrace happiness when it comes, which is really difficult in our days. So, being here and talking about tomorrow obviously leads to the idea that the future, tomorrow, is not against yesterday, against the past. It doesn't ignore the present time. It's not just une fuite en avant. We're not just running away from our situation. And I think that we should remember that catastrophe, is a term that is coming from theater, and actually from tragedy. And it is not clear whether it is a moment of release or a moment of grief. It's the same thing as the word crisis. Crisis means judgment. So it's the moment that we are going to meet the truth that we live longing for, even though we don't have the courage to speak it up loud. So, trying to come a little bit closer to our reality, I would say that today there's a monk of equilibrium between Excuse me, I haven't been looking at you all the time. So, I will try to. So, what is happening is that now we see that politics, economy, society, culture, they do not manage to mingle together. There's a problem in our symbolic structure, the meanings, the tools that we have in order to explain, in order to realize and decide afterwards, are broken. So we're in a period where we see the manifestation of a lack of meaning. A lack of meaning means that we have a legitimization problem as well, because we see that the institutions, they say things that they do not believe. And since this legitimization problem is getting bigger and bigger, and we didn't manage to solve them now, we have an even deeper problem, which is something that we could call in English a governmentability problem. Our societies seem to be more and more difficult to govern, to live together. And what does that mean? It means violence in all levels of society, but specifically state violence. Because when the state is not legitimized, when the state cannot govern, it will govern by power and violence. And this is exactly what is happening here in Greece. I really thought of showing you some pictures, but I think we're all fed up a little bit of that. But I assure you that the violence exists in all levels of communication, and the reality of the people is the reality that other countries are going to face really soon. And when a society is ailing, the laboratory of this pain is the body of artists. Purely, simply, really. It is in these bodies that we will see this absence, this need and this pain. And that means that tomorrow, this tomorrow, is exactly the moment for these artists that are going to come. And I really don't know in which generation I am. But I say this horrified, because when we say that this is the time of the artists, that means that it is the time of the death of these artists as well. And when I'm talking about death, I'm not only talking about this singer that died with a knife in his heart, literally. I'm also talking about all these others, nameless people that will die drowning in their best hopes, in their deepest truth, abandoned, just giving their lives and their bodies and their time to prepare the other ones that will emerge and that will have a name and a face in our history. And art is a nonsense that becomes important because we insist. And it's through this insistence, it is our way to look at things and to preserve things that are neglected, that we make the definition of art even wider, more dangerous. So I think that we should ask questions. And these questions should be useless, actually, especially at this period, because there is a polarization, a really strong polarization. And the free space for people to think about things, to search in the gray areas, will be narrow and more narrow and more narrow, and the space that we will have in order to talk will be almost gone. So asking questions that nobody wants to ask will be one of the main functions that we have to protect, that we have to cultivate. The big question actually is the question of desire. What do we want? What is it that is sufficient for us in order to live? And what is it that we are dreaming? But I'm not talking about the dream as something. It is actually the fact that we have to bring back desire, not as a human right, but as a human reality that has been consumed and lost. But I will probably talk about that later. And I say that because the question of desire is really important, and now that there's so much repression, we will see the desire getting out in the streets. We will see the crowds cry out what they need and what they want. When we are talking about desire, we're not talking just about somebody wanting to do something with somebody else. We're talking about something that is unnameable. It's something that passes through the walls. And it's actually the most precious thing that we have. But I wanted to keep that for the end. So let's go back to art in order to finish my small speech. Small, I hope it was small. So art today, tomorrow, as yesterday, is supposed, it must cover, fill all these fields that have been left aside, especially in our times when the economy is having this tendency to obliterate all other questions. And since we cannot quantify things, they are condemned to vanish from our field, we cannot see them anymore. So I think that now culture and civilization is treated like a tool in order to commerce, or as a commodity in order to passer notre temps, for amusement. And it is ironic because this is the moment that we need it the most. So art is supposed to talk about the memory of the sacred. And it's supposed as well to talk about the memory of death, that we cannot talk without grimace today. Art is supposed to talk about sexuality and this generalization, consuming spirit of bodily liquids. It is supposed to talk about the absurdity of this unjust world and the freedom of solidarity. It is supposed to talk about the failure of our common sense and all these truths that kept us asleep. It is supposed to talk about the notion of we, that thing that makes us be together and feel together, what is common, and what is personal as well. And it is supposed definitely to talk about the thirst for love, passion, eros, without end. All these things do exist. We're not here to bring them anew, but they're hidden into our flesh, vibrating every day. What we need to do is just give them some words, some images, and some sounds. So it is time for us to be exposed. It is time for us to say big words, like me here in front of you now. And we will be judged for them, like lovers. But we can talk at last. I think that we can talk more today than we could yesterday. And I think tomorrow it will be even more appropriate and sometimes easy to do so. And we can be happy because at least now things that they seem to be solved, they can be put out in the light of the day. We can even talk about love. We can talk about love, though, as an enigma, because love actually, it seems that it is not a sentiment, an emotion. It is more like an emotion that develops. It's an initiation that goes towards some kind of a knowledge. And it becomes transparent and light, and it surrounds everything at the end, and it becomes almost absent, strange. So, at the end, I would like to propose something really simple, because I guess there were some parts in my speech that were quite abstract. I think that we could try to evaluate all things that we do nowadays from 3 different points of view that are deeply interconnected. I think that the point of view of those who search beauty and the point of view of those who search for truth, and the third point of view of those who search for a moral value between what is good, what is bad, actually kindness. They're interrelated. And what happens is that finally, when we go deep into each one of these 3 ways, we see that they are becoming more and more united. It is impossible to have one thing, and there will be always a tension between these 3 qualities. But when we are in an impasse and we are trying to find a solution, we could change our point of view and see if we can find a different solution, a different description from one of the other 2. In Greek language, there's a really funny thing. We have the words erotisi, which means question, and the word erotas, which doesn't mean what we say in English-speaking world, erotic and eros. It is a really confusing word that it is between love and passion, between mind and body, actually. It's an overwhelming need of the being. Why I say this? Erotas and erotisi, that are so close, they're not etymologically related. So the relation is even more profound. And why I say this? Because actually, all we have left is this value of the question. This is what is left to us. This is the only reference that we can count on. Things are getting difficult, more and more, every day. It is not clear whether darkness is obscure and if light is enlightening. We really don't know where we're heading. Tomorrow is a question. And for me, we could probably take this question as the quest of what is beauty, what is truth, and of what is kindness. Have a nice stay.
When we will present some of the recommendations that we will come up during our Let's Design a Future sessions, the 3 in a row that will take place today and tomorrow. Well, I think we should have a coffee and prepare for our working sessions of this afternoon. Thank you all for being here, and again, till soon. See you.